Hey guys, welcome back. Part 3, we're going to talk about multiple platforms today. What multiple platforms is all about is skinning on iOS and other platforms. You could think of, you probably heard Google Play, Windows, BlackBerry, Amazon, everything, right? iOS is the Apple App Store, obviously. And this is just a really hot topic that a lot of people are asking about because they just don't think about that as a growth model. They think that about just the Apple App Store. And so what I want to do today is I want to walk through this this particular topic so that you can understand what the other app stores are all about. Because one of the reasons why a lot of people don't even get into them is because they just don't know what's going on. They don't understand why you go over there, why get out of the Apple App Store. They don't even think it's possible. I want to answer a couple of common questions that I get a lot because you guys probably have them too, and provide some insights into that. And I also want you to know how to approach this. I want you to see what the picture looks like, and I want to give you a very honest and clear answer. In terms of, okay, if you're going to go into some other stores, which I think you should, I want you to know how to approach it and what to think about before you do. Okay, this is less about an actual walkthrough and more about just an education in these stores. Because if you already know how to reskin an app, which this course is all about, it's pretty simple to get into a different store just about the coding. So, I've developed a lot of apps, as you guys know, no surprise there. And like everyone else, I started on Apple as well. I just said, okay, Apple's obviously where it's at. And I built all my first, couple hundred apps, the first ones, on the Apple App Store. But I very quickly became interested in the other platforms that were emerging, specifically Google and Amazon. I was really into these. I got a little bit into Windows, things like Samsung and the GetJar, which was this kind of big Android market. It still is a big Android market. But I started to get into them, and it kind of, Apple, Amazon, and Google were kind of my three big ones. And the reason why is because they were offering low-hanging fruit in additional revenue, meaning that it was just like I could just put my apps on there, and it was really easy to do. And in marketing, it's kind of a basic tenet where if you have a core product, one of the best things you can do is just distribute it in new places. If you have something that's doing well for you, the best thing you can do is just take that, repurpose it a little bit and put it somewhere else where you can make even more revenue than you are on the original product. That's just like a basic marketing one. And so I realized, okay, I've got these great products. If I can get these onto the, Android platform for Google and Amazon, I'm going to be able to make a lot more money. And so that's what I did. And luckily, you guys are in a much better position because a lot of these codes you can export automatically to multiple platforms. When I had to do it, you had to export it each way and recode it and everything else. But luckily, you don't have to do that. And so that's the biggest takeaway, is to remember that you have one product on one platform. You can take that same product, use the same graphics, everything else, and just put it onto the Android version of your app or your game. You can put it into a new store, and all of a sudden you've got this entirely new app that you just reskin for very, very little cost, very little effort. And so now I just want to run through a couple questions that people just like you ask me all the time. These are some of the most common questions I get, and I want to give you some very straight, just honest answers about them. The first is it possible to skin an app just as easily on other platforms, right? If you're going to go into Google Play, is it harder? Is it easier? And the answer is yes, it's just as easy. The only hard part is if you have a natively coded iOS app, meaning that app is only built for Apple, and you have to go in and tell your developers, hey, let's recode this as an Android version. That's the only reason why it would become complicated. If it's already built on something like Cocos 2DX or Unity, and we'll talk about these, you can export this much more easily. And all it becomes is just like putting pieces together. You already have most of the graphics, and it becomes a very easy exercise. Okay, so the short answer is yes, it can be very, very easy to put this on new platforms. The second question is, does that require a whole new code with all new resources? In other words, do you have to completely pull your app apart? Do you need to repurpose the entire thing? Do you need to design all new graphics? And absolutely not. What you do need to do is you need to adapt the code base that you have to the new platform. And like I said, if it's an exportable series of code, that's totally fine. It's going to make it easier. If it's built in native iOS, yes, you're going to have to convert it. But the bottom line is if you have a code that's easily turned into Android, you can take a lot of the graphics you did and just resize them. Go to your designer and say, hey, I need it for an Android screen now and not just for the iPhone 6 or 10 or 4 or whatever iPhone you're using. So you don't necessarily need to start over. You need to just kind of repurpose and rejigger a few things to get that going. Are Google Play and Amazon just a waste of time and money? And the short answer is absolutely not. I mean, I've done really well on both of these platforms. The difference is that they behave differently than Google and Amazon, or I'm sorry, than Apple. And I'll explain this in a little bit. But what you guys need to know is that it's not a waste of money. There's pros and cons to every store that you put your apps in, and if you recognize that and you have a good product, they can be very, very lucrative for you and very, very effective. And finally, is skinning on multiple platforms going to cut down on my beach time? And let's hope not, because the worst thing that can happen is that this causes you more stress and it doesn't just accelerate your business. So we're not gonna cut down anyone's beach time in this time. Okay, so let's just dive into this. I want to talk to you about everything specifically and hopefully answer every question I can. Now, the skinning model is not just for Apple apps. Okay, we're talking about, hey, can you put it on multiple platforms? But what you don't realize is that for a good 6 months, I mean, all I did was Google Play and all I did was Amazon. I wasn't like building an Apple app and then, oh, hey, I can also push it off to these platforms. Realize that you could go in here, and a lot of Blue Cloud readers do this too. You could just reskin Amazon apps. You could just reskin Google Play apps. It doesn't have to be on all three. So that's something just to keep in mind, is that Apple is just where it all started. And that's the primary reason why it is what it is. Because it's actually a lot easier to apply this model to other platforms on Android. Like it kind of blows your mind when you start to get out of the kind of Apple ecosystem and all the stuff that we go through to be in the Apple Store. But I want to say that one more time. It's actually easier to develop and skin apps for Android, right? So a lot of you might be saying, like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. And let me explain why that this is easier. Now, realize I'm not necessarily saying better. I'm just saying it can be easier to go from, hey, I've got an app or I got a source code and I want to get it into the store, okay? And the reason why is because other platforms offer a chance to beat the market. All these new emerging Android markets, kind of like mini markets that come over, especially internationally. And the reason I'm not listing everything off right now is because this can change, and it will change no matter what time of year, no matter what year we're in. And so it's really important to remember that, like, when you see an emerging market, you can get into that new app store. Like, I have friends that got into the Windows App Store at the very, very early stage with utility apps, and they made a killing. And this was very, very recently. I mean, this was only a couple months ago, and it's just because that market hadn't taken off yet. So that's something to think about. There's a lot of the competition is different in those markets. The second is that there's a lot of collective engagement. A lot of us have the ability to share information. So when you go into an Android market or on Google Play or on Amazon or whatever, you can collaborate with a lot of different people and you can see a lot of different things happening. You can have a lot more freedom with what you put in the App Store. The coding infrastructure, the way that you have to compile your projects on Swift or on in Objective-C, which is what Apple apps are coded in. You don't need to necessarily get into those sandboxes. I mean, you have to play by some of the rules, but you can get really flexible with how you code your apps and how you market your apps and how you monetize your apps. There's a lot more freedom in those. And another is just there's a lot less review time for the most part. I mean, Apple is notorious for having longer review times, but you can have a much shorter review time in something like Google Play, which is actually instant, or Amazon, which might take a couple days or less than that, or Windows, which is almost less than a week. Exactly. So if you go to applereviewtimes.com, if you ever want to do that, what they do is they crowdsource this from Twitter, which is actually really cool. It can be anywhere from 5 days to 11 days. I have apps that get approved in 2 days. I get apps that take 2 weeks. It's totally just up to Apple, and it's really hard to judge that. But with Google Play, I mean, you just put the app live, and it's retroactive, right? So if you put an app in the store that is breaking all sorts of terms of service, they might come back and take it off the store, but there's no gateway to get in. And Amazon, definitely less than a week. I mean, that could be the same day. Windows, same thing. It just kind of depends on the volume that they have. And honestly, remember, the people's reviewing these guys, these are people just like us that have day jobs and they work 50 hours a week or whatever. They don't really work on the weekends. When the holidays come, you're not going to get the same review times. That sort of stuff is very real. I mean, especially here in San Francisco, I can tell you that I know people who are doing these reviews, and they are just they're regular workers. So that's why it's not like an automated system yet. So, an obvious question is, but publishing to other platforms is going to cost me an arm and a leg, right? A lot of people think, well, if I go over to Google or if I go over to Amazon, this is going to cost me a ton of money. And the short answer is that's not true at all. It's a much simpler process. And you can get a lot of codes that are done in a very short period of time. So let's talk quickly about what platforms you can use to go on multiple platforms. So let's say you say, all right, I want to get in the app game, and a great thing to always do before you get in any business or any sort of endeavor like this is to ask yourself, what do I want my end goal to be? So if you're saying I want to get into multiple platforms, which I think is terrific, remember that you want to use a coding base that's going to give you the ability to export to multiple platforms very easily. This is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money moving forward. So one is Unity. Unity is just a very powerful engine. It allows you to export to tons of different user bases. Cocos 2DX is a gaming engine. I should say a physics engine that allows you to export multiple different plays. Gingy, Wave, Buildbox, Corona. Check them all out. They have a lot of potential, and they have some apps are better suited for these technologies. These tend to be more game technologies, but there's lots of different things you can do. HTML5 is a great one for any sort of mobile application that's a utility or whatever. But when you're getting started with reskins, remember that if you're gonna go multiple platforms, try to find a source code or try to get an app that has the ability to already be exported to multiple platforms. It's just going to help you so much. Because if you own a code that's cross-platform, your coder is not going to have a problem or shouldn't have a problem exporting to both. And so one of the action items I'm going to tell you is that once you select the source code you want to use to start with, or maybe you already have a source code you start with and you're getting ready to talk to your developer, ask him or her, what it's going to take to go to multiple platforms. Make sure that they know that that's what you want to do, because it's going to help them frame it. It's going to help you with the cost. You're just going to know exactly what to do. So start thinking about this early on, especially with your coder, and ask them to give you a quote for that. Because if you put this on multiple platforms, you're reaching more people. And there's, I can't even tell you how many millions and millions and millions of apps are being downloaded outside of the Apple App Store right now on multiple different platforms. It's just like a huge market, and it's growing exponentially every day, which is pretty exciting. But the reason why people always tend to start with Apple, or they always gravitate back to Apple, is because it's really popular. It's just like, that's just where it goes. And the other reason is that the customers within the Apple ecosystem tend to spend a lot of money. And what that means is that you're going to make more money in your ads. You're going to make more money in in-app purchases. It's just like for lack of a better term, the people are richer. They have more money to spend. The users have more money to spend, and they're used to spending it. The Apple App Store is big. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest in the world, and it's growing very quickly. Apple is putting a lot of weight into the iPhone and into the apps and into the App Store. And why, what about the others? Why aren't they the default? And in a lot of places, the Google Play Store is the default. I've worked on some huge games and some gaming studios, and they're Android first and then iOS second. But that's not the norm, and that's probably not the norm for a lot of you. But the reason why people don't go to the others or what's going on in the others is, one, they're growing, but with the exception of Google Play, they're pretty much all smaller than Apple's App Store. Now, this is probably going to change, especially in emerging markets like India and China and all these kind of big countries that have the ability to create their own marketplaces. But for right now, that's why they're just smaller. And the other thing is, with the exception of Amazon, most of the customers, especially on Google and Android, those users they don't spend money nearly as much. They're not looking to spend $800 on an iPhone like an Apple user would. They're looking to spend $99 on a Samsung, whatever, Samsung 6 or whatever the newest one is, right? So remember that the users are very different on other platforms, and it can be harder to monetize them. It can be harder to reach them than it is on Apple, because it's just a different mindset. And the final thing I think is really important to remember is that if you do go to multiple platforms, it's just more to manage. You all of a sudden, we always assume in reskinning that, hey, more is better. But remember that now you've got multiple accounts to manage. You've got a lot more coming down your plate that you need to really kind of rein in and say, okay, now I've got a lot more to manage. So real quick, what I want to do is a takeaway and then just a quick wrap up so that you understand everything that we're talking about with multiple platforms and exporting and reskinning on multiple platforms. So number one, skinning is not just for iOS. I think that's really important just to remember, and I want to reiterate that when you think about reskinning, when you buy a source code, remember that you are not beholden to Apple and to iOS. All you have to do is take that, you export it to Android, or you export it to the platform that you can export it to. You take the graphics that you have after you've reskinned it once, and you resize them for the new platform that you want to be on, and boom, you've got multiple apps. You've just like geometrically grown. So just remember that reskinning is not just for iOS. All right, number two, other platforms offer fewer restrictions and shorter review times. For the most part, you are going to have a lot more freedom. You're not going to deal with nearly as much as you do on Apple. Now, obviously the give and take, like I just said, is the people who you have access to once you are approved are of a different caliber. So you might not make nearly as much money or get as many downloads, but it might be easier to get in. The reason I'm saying all this is because I'm not trying to sway you one way or another. I just want you to know that there are opportunities and there's also trade-offs for going on multiple platforms. There's also, most of the time, less competition outside of the iOS platform. I mean, if you have the ability to get into these new markets early on, you can have a lot less competition. Google Play is typically on par with Apple. They tend to be able to publish the same amount. So the competition, is pretty comparable. It's just, your competition is going to be like who's doing the best job at creating the best screenshots and in the descriptions and the title and the icon and all that sort of stuff. But as the growing emerging markets come off, you guys might see something and say, hey, look, I'm going to reskin this, but I'm going to focus on China. I'm going to focus on this hot new Android market in China. And I'm just going to totally dominate that. And you might just have nobody to compete with. And all of a sudden, you have a source code that is just like the number one thing in all these new marketplaces. Fourth is that, the cost of adding your code to a new platform is typically minimal, right? And when I say minimal, that's obviously relative. But let's say you spend $500 on a source code, on redesigning it, on making it better, on updating it, making the publishing really good, and you publish it in Apple. To get that over to, let's say, Amazon, and it's a Unity code or a Cocos 2DX code, that might only be $75. I mean, it might even be less than that. It might be $100. I mean, it might be around that. But compared to the original code, it can be very minimal. And it's not a classic reskin where you need to get new graphics. It can just be like, oh, I'm just going to push this over to this new store. Now, the reason, right, if you can manage is because, if you're spending an additional 25 hours a week trying to get this thing over to Android, that's actually a cost, right? And you just kind of know that for yourself. But in general, it's just a great way to kind of expand your network very, very quickly. And lastly, check out what you're buying. When you get a source code, when you get into this business, when you're ready to take your next step, look at the coding engine and make sure that it's got a multiple platform. And that's not to say that it's a bad code if it doesn't go to multiple platforms by any means at all. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you want to go to multiple platforms, just make sure that you're just going to save yourself so much time and effort. And there's no real sense in doing all this custom development these days if you're in this reskinning business. So if you decide to do that, that's something to think about. So the bottom line for going to multiple platforms is that there's a lot of opportunity out there. It can be a cheap way to kind of grow your network onto new different things. Look at the code that you get. And, I would just urge everyone just to try it out. I think it's a really good exercise, and I think you can have a lot of fun with it. All right, I will see you guys in the next video.